good morning. Welcome to CyberTalk. And today we have very interesting topic to discuss, cybersecurity for small businesses, which is not very often talked about because everybody thinks that when it comes to cybersecurity, it just all about, large businesses, banks, healthcare industries. And I'm thrilled because we have a special guest today. Her name is Heather Noggle, and she is owner founder at Codistac, and she's going to share her insights on how do you manage run cybersecurity programs at small businesses, which is going to be a very interesting discussion. So with this, we'll get started. Codistac sounds like a very unique, interesting name. So Heather, if you could go ahead, introduce yourself, tell us more about what you do, your career journey, and about your company.
Okay, sure. Hi, I'm Heather Noggle, and I have been working in tech for 25 years and more. We'll just leave it at that. So I'll give you a little bit of history of how I got here because it's unnatural, maybe. It's unconventional. I started out as a kid messing with computers in the United States when the Commodore 64 came out. My parents got one for me, and I was, I think, 11 years old. And before then, I'd never even thought of computers. But I started programming, and my parents weren't computer people. And so we had no way to save any work I did. It was just the computer hooked to the TV. When the TV got turned off and the computer got turned off, then all the work I did went away. So over time, we fixed that so that I could write some programs and keep them. And then by the time I got into high school, having written a few practical programs to help me memorize data in junior high school, by the time I got into high school, girls really didn't do a whole lot in tech. And computer club was for geeky boys. So I got out of that and then moved into more traditional things like music and writing. And it all comes back, though. Everything we learn comes back as we get more mature and more focused in our careers. So I went through that. I went to college. I was going to be a band director. Decided against that. Got a communication degree. And everything I started into the 90s, the internet was coming online. I sent my first email in 1992. And that was while I was in college. I started playing on these text-based games called MUDs. You would telnet, so an insecure protocol for people who are not familiar with telnet, because it's not around that much anymore. There are better options, but you could go to a computer, log on to it, and play games with your users. So I did a lot of that. And so I had some background coming into my human resources career coming out of college, work for a university while I was in grad school. And this is where tech was really starting to come into business processes, and everybody needed data, and there were never enough people working in technology. And so again, I have a communication degree, and I have my human resources boss saying, Heather, can you learn this? Can you go get this? Can you crunch this data? Can you build this report? Can you build this website? And so I learned to do all that from a pretty early age, and when the internet was fairly new, before the web, and as the web was coming online, I was doing this work. And then I went into a bigger organization, which was a county government. So I've got this real heart for public service, public servants, and small organizations. The university and the county were fairly big, but they were public facing. Going through that, then the same thing happened. I was hired to interview people and talk to people all day, and ended up doing that and also writing programs, which is a strangely it's not a typical skill set you put together. And then taking those same things in my early 20s and then showing the rest of the county with technology, the very few things that we have here at our disposal that we don't need IT for, we can still build applications to do these things. No focus on security. It's the 90s. And they weren't online. So that's how I gathered most of my tech skills. And it is a bit of a roundabout story. So I'll wrap it up into coming out of that. I once actually was interviewing people for a job with a hiring manager. And when we got done, he wasn't happy with any of them. And he looked at me and he said, I want you. So I had to go home that night and learn the specifics of that programming language. And that's how I actually officially got into tech. And that would have been about 96, 97. So, all right, now we're in tech. And the long story of how I'm even qualified to be here today. After that point I was writing programs, and then I wasn't making quite the impact I wanted to. It was just too new for people. And I was too young and inexperienced to convince them that this is the direction that we're all going. Everything will eventually be online, accessible, workable with other people. And so I moved into consulting and got a software development job with a consulting firm that was supposed to be about 3 months per assignment, go on to another assignment. I learned how to do full stack development. And that's where the Codistac name comes from, is literally code stack.
Mhm.
So full stack development, including all the human aspects of that, of getting software requirements and working through the processes necessary, teasing out the information that people don't natively think to give, but it's really relevant to building a robust and helpful product for them. And so my 3 month assignment with this company moved to 6 and then moved to 5 years. And then when I went to be a stay-at-home mom, the client I'd been working for the past 5.5 years said, "We'd like you to continue working for us," and then bought out my contract. 17 years after I started working for them, I bought the company with a colleague. So I've spent essentially 22 years with that company doing various things, every last thing you can do with people and tech. That's the simplest way to put that. And watch the evolution from that very first thing I did online in 1992, sending that email, interacting on these games, how open the internet was, until where we are today and how we've put all of our lives online and not really looked at how to handle that from a security and privacy perspective. So one more thing. In December, as we're looking to grow this business, we'd step back and taken a look at, as long as I'm in here with all this knowledge in my brain, we're not going to be able to grow to the capacity that we need to. And so in December, I actually stepped out of my own company, and I've been looking toward what I'm doing now since then and going through that. So that gives you a whole lot to talk through. And I realize I went through that pretty quickly, but it's a lot.
But what I feel, it is really diverse experience.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the whole technology evolution, because I remember sending out that email. When it was 1998, 1999. Around that time, I sent my first email. It was
Yeah.
Hotmail.
Yes.
And and then things have changed so much, right? Today you cannot live without technology. So the cybersecurity aspect has really uh, become more important than ever. Like you said, in early
Mhm.
2000s, probably nobody talked about it, right? It was just one of the other things, and then today it's like very, very different. And interestingly, I was also noticing the work that you have mentioned, especially in the HR areas,
Mhm.
programming. So that's a very unique, interesting, combination. Somebody who is good at programming, HR. So that's how I think the Codistac and making technology simpler sort of worked for you. And looking at your LinkedIn post specifically in your last, 6 months, a year, notice that you write beautiful stories and then write analogies comparing normal stories with technology aspects. So any thoughts on those?
The reason behind that is to try to reach people into thinking about secure behaviors to protect their interests online. And a lot of my feet, I seem to be attracting more and more cybersecurity professionals, and I believe, to make a concerted effort to reach out to people who are not cybersecurity professionals and also make sure they're engaging with that content. And so I'm getting really good feedback from people that the way I'm approaching things is both accurate and impactful. And so that feels more like a calling. I'm not doing that for really any purpose other than I'm reaching out here to see what sort of impact I can have on changing how we think over time.
Right,
So
right.
I don't
But
ever know what I'm going to write about. I kind of loosely plan once a week, and then other things come in because life happens. We were about to say something. Go ahead, Tasha.
Correct, correct. And those stories definitely have, that impact, and they do carry, good message, definitely in terms of awareness. Now, your focus, as I understand, has been, significantly laid on small businesses,
Yes.
uh, right? So, how did you get into, that area, and what was the thought behind, focusing in that segment?
Okay, sure. So, being a business owner since early 2018, we
Mm,
are a small business. We serve some very big
mhm,
customers, but this is not Codistac. It's the one I bought. And
mm,
it's called Global Wizard. And I think we're rebranding it right now to Trabex. So it's a small business, but it serves some giant customers. And clearly, it's a software business. We've got to have a lot of cybersecurity in there and how we work and endpoints and all the things. If you have cybersecurity people listening to this, and I'm sure you do, we have to handle all those things. And we also have to handle them from as we grow, the people perspective. A rapidly growing company that starts out technical may have all the technical controls covered really well. But when people leak information or when people don't know how to work together to be secure as emerging threats come through, that's an area to address. At the same time, I started volunteering around 2019, so not quite the same time, with an organization called 1 Million Cups that caters to entrepreneurs and helping them establish their brands and getting some feedback from a community of other entrepreneurs. And so I have that background of being really interested, especially in the very, very small businesses and not just the small ones. So 1, 2, 3 people, maybe one person with the support staff. And what I'm finding when I talk with these people is they're not giving cybersecurity one thought whatsoever. They may have just email and maybe say QuickBooks Online or something like that, but there's still significant exposure there as to how they interact with these things. And maybe they aren't using multi-factor authentication. Maybe they don't know what that is. And trying to start at this level and work with organizations up to, say, 12 to 15 people is really what I think the sweet spot is from the people aspect of cybersecurity, which is where my focus is, which is having these conversations, understanding what risk is, and determining who the right service providers would be as these organizations grow. So that's where my passion for it comes from, is these are my peers, and in conversations with them, I see the need.
yeah. I mean, like you said, small businesses, they have their own limitations, right? In terms
Mm-hmm.
of, number of people, number of resources, number of technology tools that they may have, and that just brings a lot of cybersecurity challenges. And awareness is again, a different aspect altogether, because business becomes priority.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is there anything that they could do in your view to make their security better with limited budget, limited people? What is that? Yeah. How do they improve in your view?
Sure. There are free things that they can do. The problem is if you go online and you search cybersecurity for small business, you're inundated with, at least in the US, 5 or 6 different federal agencies that all do it
Mm,
differently and give you different recommendations, and they don't do so in English. So it's almost a non-starter. If you are thinking about cybersecurity, you don't necessarily know where to start. And I think that that's important. In January, I built a very short video series, which is just really, again, to get people thinking about things. All told, with all the videos, I think it's under 40 minutes of content. And so I've got that out there that I haven't started to point people to quite yet, but that's coming. And then I hope to turn that into a free course where it's all contiguous, put together in a single video, and get that out there, because I think that could serve some people and get them thinking. As far though as putting together a plan, I think it all starts with risk and determining where the business is and where it wants to go after it understands where cybersecurity fits with business tolerance for risk. So that's a very people-centric problem and a business-centric problem that has nothing to do with technology. And so once an organization understands that, and a small one may have never really thought about that other than, oh, I have a risk if I can't sell my products or I can't have my doors of my business open, then I can't make money and we go under. And then we start to dig a little more into what does that actually mean. and then the actual services that and products that need to continue even if you're not automating anything. What does that look like? And then suddenly you have a business continuity plan. It's not too hard to build an incident response plan on top of that, even if it's just as simple of if something happens, we unplug everything and here's immediately who we call. Well, that's more than a lot of organizations have today.
Correct, correct. And obviously, hiring a dedicated cybersecurity professional may not be, on their budget, on their priority. So I think, the existing staff or the management themselves will have to drive this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where do you think, or what do you think can be done to improve their awareness, education for the people? Is there anything, small businesses can do as a regular cyber hygiene practice?
Sure. So one thing is to go through and do the learning. The other thing is a business focus that there has to be some level of continued learning. There are
Mm,
a lot of companies out there who do cybersecurity awareness training from a varied perspective, including some phishing. It's,
mhm.
it's an interesting thing, though. If you're a small business of only one person, how do you fish yourself is a question I like to ask. So I have a list on my website of a lot of the vendors who do this cybersecurity awareness training. It's very affordable. And so that could take care of that. But the posture of here's how we do it in our organization has to come from the top, which if there's a true interest in cybersecurity, watching some training once or even once or twice a year isn't going to cut it. It's certainly better than doing nothing. But most likely, those organizations are going to need to undertake some sort of ongoing training with a plan, just like any other business initiative. Cybersecurity needs to be a small business initiative that is a project. And then after it's a project, it's a process.
Right. And like you said, even phishing needs to be like the phishing campaigns, phishing simulation, that also needs to be taken on priority because these days, it's not just about sending email. You're talking about text-based phishing or, voice phishing, QR codes being
Yeah.
used. Um, so there is a lot to do. And obviously, if it is just one or two people, then the focus, I believe, should be more on the learning part, right? So they then know that it's a
Mhm.
continuous education that they have to go through. Um, Now, in terms of any incident, breach, if they encounter, is there anything they could do to help themselves? Because it may have the regulatory impact, legal issues,
Mhm.
anything. Yeah.
I think knowing what your risk is as an
Mm,
organization is really
mm,
big. If you only have email and you
mm,
don't have a large budget, you're a nonprofit and you've had, I like to call it the anti-fraud training because that takes the cybersecurity
mm,
out of it and really looks at a business problem that everyone has. And you've had those things, then hopefully you've put the few steps in place that you need to for your organization at that level. You may not need some additional help, except maybe a part-time tech person to come in and make sure your machines are patched. So given that, say you get breached, if you can contain that as quickly as possible, that's your best chance for survival. I read today actually that 43% of cyber attacks are against small businesses. I think medium may be included in that statistic. So that's very scary that that's a real threat. The other
it
thing I
is. It
read,
is.
though, is somewhere about 60% of small businesses that are attacked with a cyber attack of any significance do go under. So, again, the point of breach is not the point to start thinking about cybersecurity. And a lot of people, a lot of small businesses who are breached may not know it for quite some time. So there's even that to factor in of it's not an immediate we've been hit and we just got hit and everything is gone. Backups would probably be the very first thing I would add after the fraud training is making
Mm.
sure the backups with a solid backup process. And then the machine patching, we're going to assume that's already there because that's part of what we would teach as a you absolutely have to. You have to have your people trained against fraud and you have to have your machines kept up to date and you have to have everything backed up You need to have anti-malware. I can go through the whole litany of all the
Correct.
cyber hygiene, but that's part of the initial training and what I cover in the free videos. And when I have that as a more comprehensive professional put together video, I'll cover that as well.
Sure, sure. Maybe for everybody's benefit, we'll
Mhm.
share those links to the videos that
Sure.
you have been talking about. They will be certainly beneficial for viewers. Now, we pretty much, if you want to summarize and, uh, coming to what had changed, right, over the years, like we earlier
Uh-huh.
we talked about the technology evolution. These days, now we are talking about the artificial intelligence, chat GPT, of these emerging threats. So what would be your advice, words of wisdom for small business owners so that, knowing the complexity, how do they sustain, survive in this, complex cyber world? Yeah.
Sure. AI is certainly the big new thing, and AI is not new at all. AI in the public for use by regular people at their homes or in their jobs is, though. So I think the AI becoming mainstream, this 2022, 2023 and beyond, I don't think you can, as we like to say, put the cat back in the bag. The cat is out scratching and tearing down furniture right now. So one of the things I've found in playing with this, because if I'm going to advise people of this is how you use it, here's how you don't use it, here's how it's secure. With AI, most of what people are interacting with is generative AI, like you said, Chat GPT. I've been
Correct.
in Google's Bard as well, is to understand that every bit of information that it gives you, you must verify. So that's
So
one
true.
aspect of it. Both of those technologies, the Chat GPT and the Google Bard, like to just make things up. They call it
Correct.
hallucinations. So that'd be the first thing. There's something that came out recently about a lawyer here in the United States who got a, a list of some cases to support his legal findings, and they were all false. And the
Right,
person,
right.
this lawyer, did not verify. And so, straight from cybersecurity and best practices is verify and then trust. That's our modern way of looking at things. Looking past across the history, the internet was built to disseminate information back in the dark ages when I was in there in 92, 93, sending the first email, trying to figure out what the @ sign meant. You could go via FTP, file transfer protocol, and get a whole lot of information. And now we take for granted you can go to any search engine and plug in anything you'd like. Well, previous to this, your examples and the way you got information was your university library and maybe a set of encyclopedias that you had in your home. So that opened up having these FTP sites with information that you could just go and grab and determine what to do with. Nobody really thought much about security. These were anonymous. You could log in anonymously, grab your information, much like we use a search engine today. So evolve from that to now we have information, including our login credentials, our identity, our access. We want to keep these things secret. And this public internet isn't really built for keeping things secret. It's built to disseminate information. So I would look at that from that perspective. I'm going to come back around to end this to talk just about artificial intelligence. It's still very new and not very accurate. For people who are businesses who are looking to do some automation, these are going to be their bigger small businesses and bigger businesses. Keep that in mind that it's not as accurate as it needs to be, and there's still much evolution that's going to take place here. And to be careful not to automate anything that you do not understand, because you don't have a way then to verify whether or not it works. So lots of changes in the past, lots of changes coming in the future. And looking specifically towards cybersecurity, I think that artificial intelligence will both enable the attackers to be more complex and more astute and more ability to reach people. I also think it will enable the defenders, hopefully at equal measure, to step up and have more intelligent and better defenses. Who knows at any given point in time which will be stronger?
There was really interesting, very extensive, list of recommendations. And this conversation was really insightful because, you mentioned about starting with Telnet, FTP,
Yeah.
it's all changed now. But then the risk, especially the endpoint security, malware, backups,
Mhm.
how important they are when it comes to ransomware type of cyber attacks, maintaining cyber hygiene, multi-factor policies, procedures, education, and awareness. So there is a lot, and what we would do, we'll share link to your videos, the education that you have been sort of working on for benefit of users. But this was very very insightful session, a lot of learning for me also, and I really appreciate you joining this and sharing your